Ladies and gentlemen, people communicate based on their priorities, beliefs, and emotional needs. When someone doesn't text or call, our immediate reaction is often emotional. We feel ignored, undervalued, or even rejected. But the truth is, communication is not just about frequency. It's about intent, personality, and life circumstances. Think about this. Every person has a unique way of expressing care. Some people naturally communicate through words. They check in, send long messages, and make an effort to stay in touch. Others, they express care through actions. They may not be the type to text constantly, but they show their love in the things they do, through the way they support you, listen when it matters, or show up when you need them. If we judge someone's feelings solely on their texting habits, we might miss the deeper ways they express their emotions. Now, let's talk about priorities. A person's communication habits often reflect what they value and what's currently taking up their mental space. If someone is juggling a demanding job, personal struggles, or emotional baggage, their lack of response might have nothing to do with how they feel about you. It might simply be a reflection of their life's current state. The challenge is that we often personalize silence. We assume it means they don't care, when in reality, they might just be exhausted, overwhelmed, or even unaware of how their actions affect us. Another important factor is upbringing and past experiences. Some people grew up in environments where constant communication was normal. They're used to checking in and being checked on. Others, they come from backgrounds where personal space was the norm, where emotional expression wasn't encouraged, or where love was shown in different ways. Understanding this can change how we interpret someone's actions. Instead of seeing a lack of messages as a sign of indifference, we can recognize it as a different form of expression, or simply a different habit. This brings us to a crucial point: expectation versus reality. We often create unspoken rules in our minds. Rules about how often someone should text if they care. But the problem with expectations is that they don't account for individuality. Just because you feel cared for when someone texts often doesn't mean everyone expresses care in that way. When we hold on to rigid expectations, we set ourselves up for disappointment. Instead of asking, why isn't he texting? A better question would be, what does his overall behavior show about his feelings toward me? Here's the bottom line. Communication is a two-way street. If you feel unheard or uncertain, the answer isn't to overanalyze. It's to communicate openly. Instead of assuming he doesn't care, ask yourself, have I expressed what I need? Because when we understand that people communicate in different ways, we stop making emotional assumptions and start having real conversations. And that shift, that's what leads to clarity, confidence, and peace of mind. And most of us operate from a place of fear when it comes to relationships. When someone doesn't text or call, we don't just acknowledge the action for what it is. We create a story around it. We start filling in the gaps with our own insecurities, assumptions, and past experiences. Instead of simply recognizing that someone hasn't reached out, we begin crafting a painful narrative. He must not care. Maybe I did something wrong. What if he's losing interest? These thoughts don't just come out of nowhere. They are driven by fear, past rejections, and a need for validation. But what if the story you're telling yourself isn't the truth? What if there's an entirely different perspective that could shift your emotions and free you from unnecessary stress? Perspective is one of the most powerful forces in our lives. It dictates how we feel, how we react, and ultimately how we experience the world. Two people can go through the exact same situation but have completely different reactions based on how they interpret it. Let's take an example. Imagine person A and person B both text someone they're dating. Hours go by and neither receives a response. Person A immediately thinks, wow, I must not be important to him. If he cared, he would have texted back by now. That thought triggers frustration, sadness, and insecurity. They start replaying past interactions, overanalyzing everything, and maybe even feeling angry. On the other hand, person B takes a different approach. Their first thought is, he's probably busy. I know he has a lot going on. They move on with their day, focusing on their work, hobbies, or friends. Same situation, but two completely different emotional experiences. Why? Because what we focus on shapes our reality. If you focus on the idea that his silence means rejection, you'll feel rejected. If you focus on the possibility that he's just preoccupied, you'll feel neutral. The situation itself didn't change, your perception of it did. That's the power of perspective. Now, let's take this deeper. Why do we tend to assume the worst? Because our brains are wired for survival. From an evolutionary standpoint, we are designed to detect threats, avoid pain, and anticipate danger. In modern relationships, this instinct shows up as emotional self-protection. When someone doesn't text, we don't just feel disappointed, we perceive it as a threat to our sense of worth. We assume they're losing interest, and our fear of rejection kicks in. But the reality is, most of the time, the lack of a text is not a deliberate act of neglect. It's simply life happening. Maybe he's caught up in work, lost in thought, or even instead of assuming you're busy too. Instead of assuming the worst, ask yourself, what else could this mean? Because the moment you shift your focus from fear to curiosity, you regain control of your emotions. Another factor to consider is that people show interest in different ways. Some people express care through frequent check-ins and messages, while others don't see texting as a priority. A lack of texts doesn't necessarily mean a lack of care. If he's present when you're together, makes an effort to see you, and treats you with kindness, then why let a delayed text create unnecessary doubt? When we put too much weight on one form of communication, we risk missing the bigger picture. We also have to challenge the expectations we place on others. If you expect him to text every day and he doesn't, you may feel disappointed. But is that disappointment coming from his actions or from the rule you created in your mind? Expectations set us up for unnecessary suffering when they aren't aligned with reality. Instead of expecting a certain frequency of communication, focus on how you feel when you're actually with him. Does he make you feel valued when you're together? Does he listen when you talk? Does he support your goals? These are far better indicators of care than a text message. And let's talk about emotional independence. When you rely on someone else's texts or calls to feel good about yourself, you're handing over control of your emotions. You're saying, my happiness depends on your response. But true confidence comes from within. When you develop a strong sense of self-worth, you no longer need constant reassurance from external sources. You recognize that your value isn't determined by a message on a screen. It's determined by how you see yourself. A confident person doesn't panic over a missed text because they know their worth is not tied to someone else's behavior. So, what's the solution? First, recognize when you're creating a negative story in your mind. When you catch yourself assuming the worst, pause and challenge the thought. Instead of thinking he doesn't care, ask yourself, communication is the foundation of any relationship. Yet many people fail to recognize that there are different ways to communicate love, care, and commitment. We often assume that if someone truly cares, they will express it in the same way we expect them to, through frequent texts, calls, or verbal affirmations. But in reality, not everyone expresses emotions through words. Some people show their feelings through actions, quality time, or even small, unnoticed gestures. Understanding this fundamental difference in communication styles can save you from unnecessary frustration and misinterpretation in your relationships. For many, words are the primary mode of expression. They love to talk, check in frequently, and share every detail of their lives. If this is your communication style, it's natural to feel connected through constant conversation. You thrive on reassurance, verbal affirmations, and regular interaction. But if you're dealing with someone whose communication style is different, their silence may feel like emotional distance, even when that's not the case at all. Some people, however, express love and care through action rather than words. They may not be the type to send long messages, but they will show up when you need them, support you when it matters, and make sacrifices behind the scenes. They might take care of things that make your life easier, fix something you've been struggling with, or simply be present when words aren't necessary. These people may not constantly remind you that they care through texts or calls, but their behavior reveals their true emotions. If you only measure their feelings based on their texting habits, you could completely overlook their genuine efforts. There's also the factor of personal comfort. Some individuals are naturally more expressive, while others are more reserved. Personality plays a huge role in how someone communicates. Extroverted people tend to be more vocal, engaging and expressive in their emotions. They might enjoy long conversations, frequent messaging, and ongoing verbal connection. Introverted individuals, on the other hand, may find constant communication exhausting. They may prefer meaningful, deeper conversations rather than surface-level small talk. If you're an extrovert expecting introvert levels of communication, or vice versa, misunderstandings are bound to happen. Another key element in communication differences is cultural background. In some cultures, open emotional expression is encouraged from a young age. People grow up being affectionate, using words to express love and appreciation openly. In other cultures, love is demonstrated more through actions, through responsibility, consistency, and presence rather than words. If two people from different backgrounds enter a relationship without understanding these differences, one might feel ignored while the other feels like they are expressing love in the best way they know how. Recognizing these differences can help prevent unnecessary conflicts and misinterpretations. Let's also consider past experiences. A person who has been in relationships where communication was excessive or even toxic might intentionally distance themselves from constant texting. Maybe they associate frequent check-ins with control or pressure. On the other hand, someone who has been in relationships where they felt neglected might crave reassurance through communication. These past experiences shape the way people express affection and respond to connection. Technology has added another layer of complexity to how we interpret communication. In the past, relationships thrived on in-person interaction, letters, or occasional phone calls. Today, instant messaging and social media have created new expectations. If someone doesn't reply within hours or even minutes, people start to assume the worst. But what if that person simply prefers real-life connection over digital conversation? What if their lack of constant messaging isn't a sign of disinterest, but rather a reflection of their belief that presence matters more than a text message? It's also important to recognize that people go through phases in life where their communication habits shift. A person who was once highly communicative may become more reserved due to stress, work responsibilities, or personal struggles. If someone isn't texting or calling as often, it doesn't necessarily mean they care less. It may mean their energy is directed elsewhere. Instead of assuming disinterest, ask yourself, what is this person currently going through? To create a healthy connection, it's important to align communication styles. If texting and calls are important to you, have an open conversation about it rather than making silent assumptions. Instead of thinking, he doesn't text me, so he must not care, ask, what is his natural way of expressing affection? When you approach the situation with curiosity instead of judgment, you open the door for understanding and deeper connection. There's also a difference between preference and incompatibility. If someone rarely texts but shows love through actions, and you can appreciate that, the relationship can work. But if their lack of communication makes you feel neglected or insecure, then it may be a sign of deeper incompatibility. In this case, it's not about whether the other person is wrong. It's about recognizing whether their way of expressing care aligns with your emotional needs. Ultimately, understanding different communication styles is a game changer in relationships. Instead of assuming silence equals lack of care, look at the whole picture. Pay attention to actions, patterns, and the way someone treats you beyond a screen. Not everyone speaks the same love language, but that doesn't mean they don't care. The key is learning to recognize the ways someone does express their feelings rather than only looking for the ways you expect them to. When you shift your mindset in this way, you'll eliminate unnecessary stress, build deeper connections, and set yourself up for more fulfilling relationships. Too often, people tie their self-worth to how others treat them. In relationships, this shows up when someone starts equating their value with how often their partner texts, calls, or reassures them. When the messages stop coming, or when the response time isn't as quick as expected, insecurity creeps in. The mind starts racing with questions. Did I do something wrong? Am I not good enough? Does he not care? These thoughts spiral into doubt, overanalysis, and even self-blame. But the truth is, your worth is not defined by someone else's actions. Your value exists independently of external validation, and when you start relying on others to prove your importance, you give away your personal power. At the root of this issue is a fundamental misunderstanding of self-worth versus external validation. Self-worth is an internal belief that you are valuable, deserving of love, and enough just as you are, regardless of what anyone else says or does. External validation, on the other hand, is the habit of seeking approval, love, or reassurance from outside sources in order to feel good about yourself. Many people unknowingly fall into the trap of external validation, basing their happiness on whether or not someone texts them back, compliments them, or shows them affection in a particular way. While external validation feels good in the moment, it's unstable. It means your confidence depends on circumstances you can't control. Think about it. If your self-esteem rises and falls based on how much attention someone gives you, you will always feel uncertain because you've placed your sense of self in someone else's hands. But when you build unshakable self-worth, you no longer need to depend on someone's text to feel valued. You don't panic if they don't respond right away, and you don't question your worth just because they're not constantly checking in. Instead, you recognize that your value is already established. You are complete with or without their attention. The need for validation is often rooted in past experiences. Many people grow up in environments where love and approval were conditional. Maybe they were praised only when they achieved something or felt unnoticed unless they performed a certain way. Over time, this teaches the subconscious mind that validation must be earned and that love is tied to specific actions rather than being freely given. As adults, these individuals seek reassurance in relationships to fill that gap, hoping that constant communication will confirm their importance. But the truth is, no amount of external validation can heal a wound that must be addressed from within. The only lasting way to feel secure is to develop internal confidence, independent of outside approval. This doesn't mean communication isn't important in relationships. It absolutely is. But there's a difference between wanting connection and needing it to feel whole. When you rely on someone else to make you feel secure, you place an unfair burden on them. No partner, no matter how loving, can be responsible for your self-worth. And if your happiness is constantly dependent on their actions, the relationship can become strained. A healthy connection is built on mutual respect and trust, not on an endless cycle of proving love through text messages. So how do you shift from seeking external validation to owning your self-worth? First, you have to become aware of your thought patterns. When you catch yourself feeling anxious about whether or not someone is texting you, pause and ask yourself, why does this bother me? What am I making it mean? Often the anxiety isn't about the text itself. It's about the deeper fear of being unimportant, unloved, or rejected. But the reality is, your importance isn't measured by a message on a screen. It's determined by the way you show up in the world, the way you treat yourself, and the value you bring to others. Next, focus on building confidence in yourself rather than relying on outside sources. Confidence isn't about being arrogant or pretending you don't care. It's about knowing your worth without needing constant reminders. You can do this by developing a strong sense of identity, pursuing passions that fulfill you, and surrounding yourself with people who appreciate you for who you are, not just for what you provide. When your life is full and meaningful on its own, you won't feel desperate for someone else's validation. You'll appreciate their attention, but you won't need it to feel good about yourself. Another key step is to set boundaries with your own emotions. Instead of reacting immediately to a lack of communication, train yourself to respond with logic rather than fear. If someone doesn't text, rather than assuming the worst, remind yourself, this has nothing to do with my worth. I am still the same valuable person regardless of their response time. When you practice this repeatedly, you rewire your brain to detach self-worth from external factors. Over time, you develop a deep-rooted belief that you are enough, no matter what. Finally, remember that relationships should enhance your life, not define your worth. A partner is meant to be a complement to your happiness, not the source of it. When you operate from a place of self-assurance, you naturally attract people who respect and appreciate you. And if someone is inconsistent in their communication or makes you question your importance, you'll be able to recognize that it's their behavior, not a reflection of your value. Instead of chasing validation, you'll set a standard. I deserve consistency and respect, and if someone can't meet that, I won't internalize it as a flaw in me. True confidence doesn't come from getting the perfect text or call. Comes from knowing that no matter what happens, you are already whole. You are worthy. You are enough, and you never need someone else's validation to prove it. Emotional resilience is one of the most powerful skills a person can develop, yet it is often overlooked in relationships. When someone doesn't text or call, it can trigger a wave of emotions. Anxiety, doubt, frustration, even sadness. The mind jumps to worst-case scenarios, creating unnecessary stress. But the key to emotional freedom isn't in controlling what others do. It's in controlling how you respond. Resilience is the ability to manage your emotions, maintain inner peace, and not let external circumstances dictate your self-worth or happiness. When you cultivate this skill, you stop overreacting to small things, and instead, you handle situations with clarity, confidence, and emotional strength. One of the biggest challenges in relationships is that people often react impulsively to their emotions instead of pausing to process them. If someone doesn't text back for hours, the immediate reaction might be to feel hurt or assume the worst. That feeling can quickly lead to frustration, and before you know it, you're either withdrawing in disappointment or sending an unnecessary emotional message. But what if instead you took a moment to step back? What if you allowed yourself to feel the initial emotion without acting on it right away? That is emotional resilience in action, the ability to acknowledge your feelings without letting them control your actions. Resilience is built by shifting your focus from what you can't control to what you can. You can't force someone to communicate the way you want. You can't make someone respond faster or express themselves differently. But what you can control is how you interpret their actions, how much mental energy you give to the situation, and how you take care of yourself in the process. When you focus on what you can control, you take back your power. You stop waiting for someone else to give you peace of mind, and you create it for yourself. A huge part of resilience is emotional regulation, the ability to manage your feelings in a healthy way. Instead of letting anxiety take over when someone doesn't text, practice self-soothing techniques. Take deep breaths, go for a walk, listen to music, or journal your thoughts. Remind yourself that a lack of immediate response does not define your worth or the strength of the relationship. When you train yourself to self-regulate rather than react emotionally, you develop the ability to handle uncertainty without feeling overwhelmed. Perspective also plays a crucial role in resilience. Often people personalize silence when it has nothing to do with them. If a partner doesn't call, the automatic assumption might be, he doesn't care about me. But in reality, there could be countless reasons. You might be stressed, busy, dealing with personal challenges, or even assuming you're occupied too. When you practice giving people the benefit of the doubt, you release yourself from unnecessary pain. Instead of assuming neglect, choose to assume neutrality or even positivity. This doesn't mean ignoring red flags, but it does mean recognizing that not everything is a reflection of your worth. Developing resilience also means strengthening your sense of self outside of your relationships. People who struggle with emotional resilience often tie their well-being too closely to their romantic life. If the relationship feels stable, they feel happy. If there's a small issue, they feel emotionally unstable. But a resilient person builds a fulfilling life outside of any one relationship. They cultivate hobbies, friendships, personal goals, and a strong sense of purpose. When your happiness comes from multiple sources rather than just one person, you naturally become less reactive. You stop obsessing over texts or calls because your life is already rich and meaningful. Resilience also involves learning how to respond rather than react. A reaction is immediate, emotional, and often impulsive. A response, on the other hand, is intentional and thoughtful. Let's say your partner hasn't texted all day. A reactive person might send an angry or passive-aggressive message out of frustration. A resilient person, however, takes a step back and evaluates. Is this really worth getting upset over? Could there be another explanation? Is this part of a pattern, or is it just a one-time thing? Instead of jumping to conclusions, they address the situation with a level-headed approach. If communication is truly an issue, they bring it up calmly and constructively rather than through emotional outbursts. Boundaries are another essential part of emotional resilience. If someone's communication style consistently makes you feel anxious or unimportant, it's okay to set a standard for what you need in a relationship. The difference between resilience and unhealthy attachment is that a resilient person doesn't demand or beg for attention. They clearly communicate their needs and, if necessary, walk away from situations that don't align with their values. Emotional strength means knowing when to have the conversation, when to compromise, and when to let go. Another powerful way to build resilience is through practicing detachment, not detachment from care or love, but detachment from control. Many people experience stress in relationships because they want to control the outcome. They want certainty, constant reassurance, and predictability. But real strength comes from accepting that you cannot control every aspect of another person's behavior. When you learn to let go and trust that things will unfold as they should, you free yourself from the weight of unnecessary worry. This doesn't mean you accept mistreatment, but it does mean you stop wasting energy trying to control things beyond your power. Self-talk is also a major factor in resilience. If every time someone doesn't text, you tell yourself, I must not be important, that thought becomes a belief. But if instead you shift your internal dialogue to, I am valuable regardless of how others behave, you build unshakable confidence. Your inner voice determines how you experience situations. Strengthening resilience means replacing negative self-talk with empowering thoughts. Thoughts that remind you of your worth, your independence, and your ability to handle any situation with grace. Ultimately, emotional resilience is about mastering your mindset. It's about recognizing that external events like a missed call or an unanswered text do not have the power to dictate your emotions unless you allow them to. When you develop resilience, you stop overanalyzing, you stop overreacting, and you start living with peace and confidence. You trust yourself, you trust your ability to handle challenges, and you no longer let small things shake your sense of self. That is the ultimate freedom in any relationship. Not needing constant reassurance, but knowing deep down that you are already enough. The foundation of any strong relationship is open and honest communication. Yet, many people struggle to express their needs clearly, often expecting their partner to just know what they want. When someone doesn't text or call as often as expected, frustration builds up, but instead of addressing it directly, they either suppress their feelings or react emotionally. Neither approach leads to a healthy outcome. Pressing emotions results in silent resentment, while reacting emotionally can push the other person away. The key to maintaining a healthy relationship is to communicate openly and assertively, expressing needs in a way that fosters understanding rather than conflict. Clear communication starts with self-awareness. Before expressing concerns to a partner, it's important to first identify what is truly bothering you. Are you upset because of the lack of texting itself? Or is it something deeper? Are you seeking more emotional connection, reassurance, or quality time? Often people focus on the surface level issue, missed texts or calls, instead of addressing the underlying emotional need. When you take the time to reflect, you gain clarity on what you actually need, making it easier to communicate effectively. Many people hesitate to bring up issues because they fear sounding needy or demanding, but expressing your needs is not a weakness. It's essential for a healthy relationship. The key is how you communicate. Instead of blaming or accusing, which often leads to defensiveness, use I statements to express how you feel. Saying, you never text me, you don't care, puts the other person on the defensive. But saying, I feel disconnected when we don't communicate regularly, and I'd love to find a balance that works for both of us, invites conversation instead of conflict. This approach shifts the dynamic from blaming to problems. Understanding your partner's communication style is just as important as expressing your own. Everyone has different preferences when it comes to staying in touch. Some people naturally communicate frequently throughout the day, while others are more reserved. Neither is right or wrong, it's simply a difference in style. Instead of assuming that a lack of text means a lack of care, have an open discussion about how both of you prefer to communicate. Ask your partner what feels natural for them and share what makes you feel connected. Finding a middle ground prevents unnecessary misunderstandings. It's also important to set expectations together. Many relationship frustrations stem from unspoken expectations that one person assumes the other should just know. If you want more frequent communication, don't assume your partner automatically understands that. Express it. Have a conversation where you both discuss what feels good and reasonable. Maybe you agree on checking in once a day, or maybe you realize that quality time in person matters more than texting. When expectations are clear, neither person is left guessing or feeling disappointed. Another key aspect of healthy communication is listening. Truly listening, not just waiting for your turn to speak. When your partner shares their perspective, resist the urge to immediately defend your own. Instead, focus on understanding their point of view. Ask questions like, what makes you feel connected in a relationship? Or what's your ideal way of keeping in touch? By showing a genuine interest in their feelings, you create a space where both of you feel heard and valued. One common mistake people make is assuming that if their partner cared enough, they would automatically communicate in the way they desire. But love isn't about mind reading, it's about learning and growing together. Just because someone expresses affection differently doesn't mean they don't care. Instead of expecting perfection, focus on progress. If your partner makes an effort to adjust their communication style after discussing it, acknowledge and appreciate it. Positive reinforcement encourages more of the behavior you want to see. Boundaries also play a significant role in communication. Expressing your needs doesn't mean demanding constant attention. It's about finding a balance between connection and personal space. Some people naturally need more alone time or have demanding schedules that affect their ability to communicate frequently. Respecting these boundaries while also ensuring your needs are met creates a healthy dynamic where neither person feels suffocated or neglected. Technology has made instant communication the norm, but it's also created unrealistic expectations. Just because someone isn't responding immediately doesn't mean they're uninterested. Life gets busy, and not everyone is glued to their phone 24/7. Instead of assuming the worst, give your partner the benefit of the doubt. And if it truly bothers you, express it calmly rather than bottling it up or overreacting. Conflict is a natural part of any relationship, but how you handle it determines the strength of the connection. If texting habits become a recurring issue, approach the conversation with a solution-oriented mindset. Instead of arguing over who's right or wrong, focus on what works best for both of you. Ask, how can we meet in the middle rather than, why don't you text me more? This keeps the discussion constructive rather than confrontational. At the end of the day, relationships thrive on mutual understanding, effort, and respect. No one is perfect, and expecting flawless communication will only lead to frustration. The goal isn't to force someone into your communication style, but to create a relationship where both people feel heard and valued. When you learn to express your needs without fear, listen with empathy, and find common ground, you build a connection that is both strong and fulfilling. At the heart of every strong relationship is understanding trust and emotional security. If someone's texting or calling habits make you question your worth, it's a sign to shift the focus inward, to build self-confidence, resilience, and effective communication skills. Instead of letting silence create anxiety, use it as an opportunity to strengthen your mindset, reinforce your boundaries, and express your needs with clarity. True emotional freedom comes when you no longer need constant reassurance to feel valued. Your worth is not measured by the frequency of someone's messages, but by the strength of your self-belief. When you cultivate confidence and communicate openly, you stop overanalyzing every missed text and start embracing relationships with trust and security. At the end of the day, a relationship should add to your happiness, not be the source of it. If someone genuinely cares, their actions will reflect it, not just through texts, but through consistency, respect, and effort. And if their communication style doesn't align with yours, a mature and open conversation can bridge the gap. But most importantly, no relationship, no matter how fulfilling, should ever define your self-worth, because the most powerful validation you can ever receive is the one you give yourself.